Good evening, my friends. I am so glad you chose this video to watch. Right now, wherever you are in this wide world, whatever burden you are carrying today, I want you to put it down. In just a moment, we will travel back to a time when the world was young, when empires were born from nothing but will, violence, and vision. Tonight, we will enter the story of Rome. From a small band of shepherds on 7 muddy hills to legions marching across 3 continents, from the cry of a wolf caring for 2 abandoned twins to the silence of an emperor who finally fell with his sword in his hand. This has been a journey of over 2,000 years, and every moment of it has shaped the world you live in today. Before we begin, I would love to know where you are listening from. Are you in Texas, watching the stars come out? Massachusetts, deep in the night? Perhaps you're somewhere else, curled up under a blanket, letting history be your companion in the darkness. If this resonates with you, give me a like. Leave a comment. Tell me your city, your time zone, what brought you here. And if you want more nights like this, subscribe now. Now, take a deep breath. Let your mind be still. Let the present fade. We're going back to the beginning. Back to the moment when legends became stone, and stone became empires. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Wolf and the Brothers. It begins in a place that does not yet have a name. Central Italy, in the time before history learned to write itself down. The land rolls in gentle waves, covered in oak and olive, wild grasses that bend beneath the wind. 7 hills rise from the plain like the knuckles of a half-buried hand. Between them, a river moves slow and brown, carrying silt and secrets toward a distant sea. The Tiber. It floods in spring, retreats in summer, and along its banks the earth is soft and fertile. This is a good place to grow grain, to graze sheep, to build a life if you're willing to work for it. But it's also a dangerous place. Malaria hides in the marshes, raiders come down from the mountains, and the tribes that live here, scattered and suspicious, do not trust strangers. There are Latins in the lowlands, farmers who speak a language that will one day conquer the world, though they don't know it yet. There are Sabines in the hills to the east, tough and traditional, clinging to old gods and older ways. And to the north, there are the Etruscans, wealthy and strange, who build cities of stone and bury their dead in painted tombs beneath the earth. These people trade, sometimes. They fight, often. They marry across borders when it suits them. But they do not think of themselves as one people. Not yet. The Greeks have colonies far to the south, glittering ports where philosophy and wine flow in equal measure. Carthage controls the Western Sea, its ships fat with trade and ambition. But here, in the center of the peninsula, there is no great power. Only tribes. Only survival. And in the shadow of one particular hill, the Palatine, something is about to begin. The land does not know it yet. The gods, perhaps, do. But the people are still living their small lives, raising their children, tending their flocks, telling their stories by firelight, unaware that one of those stories is about to break free from the realm of myth and carve itself into the surface of the world. The story, when it is told, always begins the same way. There was a city called Alba Longa, older than Rome, nestled in the Alban Hills southeast of where the 7 hills stand. It was ruled by a line of kings who traced their lineage back to Aeneas, the Trojan hero who fled burning Troy and came to Italy carrying his father on his back and the gods of his people in his arms. Generations passed. The crown passed from father to son, as crowns do, until it came to a man named Numitor. He was a good king, just and wise, beloved by his people. He had a daughter, Rhea Silvia, and a brother, Amulius. And Amulius wanted the throne. It's an old story. Ambition wears a crown better than patience does. One night, Amulius struck. Numitor was overthrown, exiled, stripped of his power, but allowed to live, perhaps because Amulius thought mercy would make him look noble, or perhaps because even tyrants fear the god's judgment for spilling a brother's blood. But Amulius was not a fool. He knew that Numitor's line could threaten him, so he took Rhea Silvia, the rightful princess, and made her a Vestal virgin. The Vestals were priestesses of the goddess Vesta, keeper of the sacred flame. They were honored, powerful in their own way, but they were bound by an ironclad vow, chastity. For 30 years, they could not marry, could not bear children. The penalty for breaking that vow was death, buried alive in a lightless tomb. Amulius thought he was clever. If Rhea Silvia had no children, then Numitor's bloodline would end with her. The throne would be safe. But the gods, it seems, had other plans. One afternoon, near a sacred grove by the river, Rhea Silvia fell asleep in the dappled shade. Some say she was tired from her duties. Some say the god himself made her sleep. Either way, when she woke, everything had changed. Mars, the god of war, had come to her. Not in thunder or violence, but in silence, in shadow, in a way the stories do not fully explain. And when Rhea Silvia realized what had happened, she knew her life was over. She was carrying twins. The months passed. She tried to hide it, wrapping herself in loose robes, avoiding the eyes of the other priestesses. But eventually, the truth could not be concealed. Her belly swelled. The priestesses reported her. Amulius was summoned. He could have killed her immediately. The law demanded it. But she was still his niece, still of royal blood, and perhaps some small part of him hesitated. So he locked her away, let her give birth in darkness, and when the babies came, 2 boys, red-faced and squalling, he took them. He named them, briefly, Romulus and Remus. Then he ordered them drowned. The servant tasked with the deed was not a cruel man. He did not have the heart to dash the infants against stones or throw them from a cliff. Instead, he placed them gently in a woven basket, the kind used for carrying bread, and set it on the water. The Tiber was high that spring. Snowmelt from the mountains had swollen the current, and the river moved fast and cold. The basket rocked, dipped, spun in eddies. It should have sunk. It should have overturned. But it didn't. The river carried the twins downstream, away from Alba Longa, away from the plans of kings and the justice of priests. It carried them west, toward the 7 hills, toward a fig tree growing near the water's edge, its roots thick and gnarled, holding the bank together. There, in the shallows, the basket came to rest. The babies cried, and something heard them. She was not a monster. The wolf that found the twins was simply a mother. Her pups had died, stillborn or taken by predators, and her body still ached with milk she had no one to give. She heard the crying and followed the sound, nose low to the ground, ears pricked forward. When she found the basket, she did not see enemies. She saw need. The stories say she pulled the babies from the woven reeds with her teeth, careful not to puncture their soft skin. She carried them, one at a time, back to her den beneath the roots of the Palatine Hill. And there, in the darkness and the warmth, she nursed them. Her fur was coarse and smelled of earth. Her breathing was steady, rhythmic, a sound the twins would know better than any lullaby. For weeks, maybe months, she kept them alive. She licked them clean. She curled her body around theirs when the nights grew cold. She taught them, in her way, that the world could be harsh but not always cruel. A shepherd named Faustulus found them eventually. He'd been tracking the wolf, worried she might threaten his flock, and when he discovered her den, he expected to find bones. Instead, he found 2 human children, plump and healthy, crawling in the dirt, reaching for the wolf's face with chubby hands. Faustulus stood there for a long moment, trying to understand what he was seeing. Then he made a choice. He chased the wolf away, gently, and gathered the boys into his arms. He brought them home to his wife, Acca Laurentia. She asked no questions. They had no children of their own, and perhaps she saw this as a gift from the gods. Or perhaps she simply saw 2 babies who needed a mother. They named them Romulus and Remus, not knowing those were the names they'd been born with, and they raised them as their own. The twins grew strong. They grew up among the flocks, learning to read the sky for weather, to track wolves and foxes, to fight off raiders with staffs and stones. They were bold, fearless in the way that children are when they don't yet understand death. They led the other shepherd boys in games that were half play, half war. But there was something different about them, something people noticed. They stood taller. They spoke with certainty. When they gave orders, other boys followed. It wasn't cruelty or bullying. It was something older, something in the blood. When they were young men, perhaps 18 or 19 years old, they got into trouble. A band of thieves had been raiding the countryside, and Remus, brash and reckless, decided to hunt them down. He and his friends set an ambush, but it went wrong. Remus was captured, dragged before the local magistrate, and brought to the king of Alba Longa. To Numitor, the old man looked at the boy standing before him and felt something stir in his chest. The shape of the face, the defiant eyes. The age was right. He began to ask questions. Meanwhile, Faustulus, terrified that his son would be executed, told Romulus the truth. He told him about the basket, the river, the wolf. He told him everything. Romulus went to Alba Longa. He met his grandfather, and together, with Remus freed and the truth revealed, they overthrew Amulius. It was swift and brutal. Amulius died with a sword in his belly, choking on blood and betrayal. Numitor reclaimed his throne. The people cheered. Justice, they said, had been done. Romulus and Remus could have stayed. They could have lived as princes, wealthy and safe, heirs to a kingdom. But they didn't. Something pulled them back to the hills, to the place where the wolf had found them, to the fig tree by the river. They wanted to build something of their own. The decision was made on a spring morning, with the hills green and the sky wide open above them. Romulus and Remus stood together, looking out over the 7 hills, and they agreed they would found a city here, a new city, a place where exiles and outcasts and ambitious men could come and make something of themselves, but they couldn't agree on where. Romulus wanted the Palatine Hill. It was higher, easier to defend, and it was the place where the wolf had sheltered them. It felt sacred to him, chosen. Remus preferred the Aventine. It had a better view of the river, better access to trade routes. It was practical, they argued. Days passed, and the argument grew sharper. Neither would yield. Finally, they decided to let the gods choose. They would take the auspices, read the omens, watch the flight of birds. Whoever saw the most birds, or saw them first, would win the right to name and rule the city. Remus climbed the Aventine at dawn. Romulus climbed the Palatine. They waited. Remus saw 6 vultures circling in the pale morning light. He shouted down to his followers. The gods had chosen him. But then Romulus saw 12. The argument exploded. Remus claimed he'd seen his birds first. That timing mattered more than number. Romulus countered that 12 was double 6, that the gods had spoken clearly. Their followers took sides. Voices rose. Hands went to weapons. And then, in the heat and the confusion, Romulus began to mark out the boundaries of his city. He took a plough, bronze and heavy, and he drove it through the earth in a wide circle around the Palatine. Where the plough cut, he said, walls would rise. This was the Pomerium, the sacred boundary. No one could cross it armed. No one could violate it without inviting the wrath of the gods. Remus, furious, mocked him. These walls, he shouted, a baby could jump them. And then, to prove his point, he did. He leaped over the furrow, grinning, daring his brother to do something about it. What happened next is unclear. Some say Romulus killed him with his own hands, striking him down with a spade. Some say it was one of Romulus's followers, a man named Sella, who drove a blade between Remus's ribs. Some say it was an accident, that the blow was meant to warn, not to kill. But the result was the same. Remus fell. His blood soaked into the freshly turned earth, and Romulus stood over him, breathing hard, and said the words that would define his city. So perish anyone who crosses my walls. The first law of Rome was written in a brother's blood. Romulus buried Remus on the Aventine, the hill he'd wanted. He did not speak of it again. He turned back to his work, and he built. The date, according to tradition, was the 21st of April, in the year 753, before the birth of Christ. The year doesn't matter as much as the act. A line had been drawn, a boundary had been set, and Rome, for better or worse, had been born. Romulus became the first king. Around him, the city began to grow. Men came from the surrounding countryside, drawn by the promise of land, of opportunity, of a fresh start. They were exiles, criminals, runaway slaves, younger sons with no inheritance. They were hungry and desperate and willing to work. Romulus divided them into tribes. He created a senate, a council of elders to advise him. He established laws, simple and harsh, meant to keep order among men who had none. But there was a problem. There were no women. A city of men can fight, can build, can plough fields and raise walls. But it cannot endure. It cannot grow. Without women, without families, Rome would die in a single generation. Romulus knew this. So he devised a plan. He invited the neighboring tribes to a festival, a great celebration in honor of Neptune. There would be feasting, games, horse races, wine. The Sabines came, curious and unsuspecting, bringing their wives and daughters. The festival began. Music played. Wine flowed. Everyone relaxed. And then, at a signal from Romulus, the Roman men moved. They seized the Sabine women. Not all of them, but many. Young women, mostly daughters of good families. They dragged them back into the city, barred the gates, and claimed them as wives. It was brutal. It was calculated. And it worked. The Sabine men, furious and humiliated, went home and prepared for war. But the women, trapped in Rome, made a different choice. Some fought. Some wept. But others, over time, began to see that their new husbands were not monsters. They were rough, yes, but they were earnest. They wanted families. They wanted futures. When the Sabine army finally came, months later, ready to burn Rome to the ground, it was the women who stopped them. They ran between the two armies, holding babies, screaming at their fathers and brothers and husbands to stop. "If you fight," they cried, "you will make us widows or orphans. We have made our peace. Now you must make yours." The men, shamed and stunned, lowered their weapons. The Sabines and the Romans merged. Two peoples became one. And Rome grew stronger. Romulus ruled for many years. He was a hard king, but not a cruel one. He led his people in war, expanded their territory, earned respect from neighboring tribes. Rome became known as a place where bold men could thrive. But his end, like his beginning, is wrapped in mystery. One day, Romulus was reviewing his troops on the field of Mars when a violent storm rolled in. Thunder cracked. Lightning split the sky. A cloud descended, thick and dark, swallowing him whole. When the storm passed, Romulus was gone. Some of his followers claimed they saw him ascending into the heavens, taken by the gods, transformed into the deity Quirinus. Others whispered that the senators, tired of his power, had murdered him and hidden his body. No one knows the truth, but the city remained. The walls remained, and the idea, planted in blood and ambition and divine favor, took root. Rome had been born in violence. It had been shaped by necessity, and it would not stop growing, not for 1,000 years. Chapter 2. 7 Kings, 7 Lessons. The city that Romulus left behind was restless. It was a city of walls and warriors, young and raw, built on ambition and barely controlled violence. The men who lived there knew how to fight, how to survive, how to take what they needed, but they did not yet know how to live together in peace. They needed a king. But who? The Senate debated. The people argued. And in the end, they did something unusual. They chose a man who had not asked for the throne. A man who lived outside the city, in the Sabine hills, known not for his strength or his conquests, but for his wisdom. His name was Numa Pompilius. He was, by all accounts, a quiet man, a farmer, a thinker. He spent his days walking in the forests, meditating beneath old trees, listening to the wind move through the leaves. People said he spoke with the gods, or perhaps with a nymph named Egeria, who lived in a sacred grove and whispered divine secrets into his ear. When the delegation from Rome arrived, offering him the crown, Numa refused. "I am not a warrior," he told them. "I am not the man you need." But they insisted. "We have had enough war," they said. "We need someone to teach us peace." Eventually, reluctantly, Numa agreed. He came to Rome in the year 715 before Christ, and he became its second king. And from the very first day, he set about transforming the city in ways no one expected. Numa did not build walls. He built temples. He did not forge swords. He forged rituals. Where Romulus had taught the Romans how to fight, Numa taught them how to pray. He divided the year into 12 months, creating a calendar that gave shape to time, that told farmers when to plant and when to harvest, that marked out festivals and holy days. Before Numa, the Roman year had been chaotic, uneven. Now it had rhythm. Now it had order. He established priesthoods. The flamens, who tended the gods, the augurs, who read omens in the flight of birds and the entrails of sacrificed animals, the Vestal virgins, who kept the sacred flame burning in the temple of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. That flame, Numa declared, must never go out. As long as it burned, Rome would endure. He built a temple to Janus, the two-faced god who looked both forward and backward, who guarded doorways and transitions. The temple had great bronze doors, and Numa decreed that they would remain open in times of war and closed in times of peace. For the 43 years of Numa's reign, those doors stayed closed. It was the longest peace Rome would ever know. Numa taught the people to honor the gods properly, to offer sacrifices not out of fear but out of gratitude. He taught them that strength without piety was just brutality, that a city built only on violence would eventually devour itself. He walked among them simply, without guards or ceremony. He settled disputes with words, not weapons. He fasted, meditated, and spent long nights alone in the sacred grove, returning at dawn with new laws, new rituals, new ways of thinking. The people loved him for it. When Numa died, old and full of years, in the year 673 before Christ, the Romans buried him with honor. They said the nymph Egeria wept so hard she dissolved into a spring, her tears flowing forever in the grove where she and Numa had walked. The doors of the temple of Janus opened again. The peace was over. But something had changed. Rome was no longer just a city of warriors. It was a city with a soul. The third king was nothing like the second. Tullus Hostilius was a warrior through and through. Where Numa had closed the doors of war, Tullus threw them wide open. He believed that Rome had grown soft under Numa's gentle reign, that the people had forgotten what made them strong. "We are Romans," he said. "We were born to conquer," and conquer he did. His first target was Alba Longa, the city where Romulus and Remus had been born, the city of their grandfather Numitor. It was the mother city, older than Rome, and Tullus saw it as a rival. The war began over a border dispute, petty and small, the kind of argument that could have been solved with words. But Tullus did not want words. He wanted blood. Rather than waste men in open battle, the two cities agreed to settle the matter with a duel. Each side would choose 3 champions. Whichever side won would claim dominance over the other. Rome chose the Horatii, 3 brothers, young and fierce. Alba Longa chose the Curiatii, also 3 brothers, equally matched. They met on a field between the two cities, with both armies watching. Swords were drawn. The fight began. It was brutal. 2 of the Horatii fell quickly, cut down by the Curiatii, but the third, wounded and bleeding, did something clever. He ran. The Curiatii, also wounded, chased him, but they were not equally injured. One was faster than the others. They spread out, and when they did, the surviving Horatius turned. He killed them one by one, separating them, using their wounds against them. By the time the dust settled, all 3 Curiatii were dead. Rome had won, but Tullus was not satisfied with victory. He wanted Alba Longa destroyed. He marched his army to the city gates and demanded surrender. The people of Alba Longa had no choice. They opened the gates. Tullus took everything. He burned the city to the ground, scattered its stones, and forced its people to move to Rome. The population of Rome doubled overnight. The Senate expanded. The city grew crowded, chaotic, buzzing with new energy. Tullus ruled for 32 years, and he spent most of them at war. He fought the Sabines, the Latins, the Etruscans. He expanded Rome's territory, filled its treasury with plunder, built barracks and training grounds. But he neglected the gods. He did not perform the proper rituals. He did not offer the right sacrifices. And the gods, according to the stories, noticed. In the final year of his reign, a plague swept through Rome. People died in the streets. Tullus himself fell ill, weak and feverish, his strength draining away. In desperation, he tried to perform a ritual to Jupiter, but he did it wrong. Lightning struck his palace. Tullus died in the flames, along with his entire household. The message was clear. Even kings must respect the gods. The fourth king, Ancus Marcius, was Numa's grandson. He tried to bring balance. He reopened the temple of Janus, but he did not seek war for its own sake. He fought when necessary, defended Rome's borders, but he also built. He understood that a great city needed more than soldiers. It needed infrastructure. Ancus built the first bridge across the Tiber, a wooden structure that allowed trade and travel to flow more easily. He founded the port of Ostia at the river's mouth, giving Rome access to the sea. He expanded the city's salt works, secured its water supply, and fortified its borders. Under Ancus, Rome became more than a military outpost. It became a hub, a place where goods and ideas could meet and mingle. He ruled for 24 years, and when he died, he left behind a city that was stronger, wealthier, and more connected to the world beyond its walls. But the throne would not pass to his sons. It would pass to an outsider, a man from the north, a man who would change everything. His name was Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, but history remembers him simply as Tarquin. He was not Roman. He was Etruscan, or half Etruscan, born in the city of Tarquinii to the north. His father had been a Greek exile, wealthy but forever marked as foreign. Tarquin inherited that wealth, but he could never inherit respect. In Etruria, he would always be an outsider. So he left. He took his wife, Tanaquil, and his fortune, and he travelled south to Rome. Tanaquil was a woman of sharp mind and sharper ambition. As their wagon approached the city, an eagle swooped down and snatched the cap from Tarquin's head. It circled once, twice, then placed the cap back on his head and flew away. Tanaquil smiled. "That," she said, "is an omen. You will be king." And she was right. Tarquin ingratiated himself with King Ancus, became his advisor, his friend. When Ancus died, Tarquin was named guardian of the king's sons. And then, through a combination of charm, bribery, and political maneuvering, he convinced the people to elect him king instead. The sons of Ancus were furious, but they were young, and Tarquin was clever. He sidelined them, ignored them, and set about transforming Rome. Tarquin brought Etruscan engineers, Etruscan architects, Etruscan ideas. He drained the marshy lowlands between the hills and created the Forum, a great public space where markets could flourish and assemblies could gather. He began construction on the Circus Maximus, a massive arena for chariot races and public games. And he started building the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, a structure so grand it would take decades to complete. Rome, under Tarquin, became beautiful. It became ambitious, but it also became divided. The fifth king was Servius Tullius, and his story is one of the strangest in Roman history. He was born, they said, to a slave woman, a captive from a conquered city. One day, when he was still a baby, sleeping in the palace, flames appeared around his head. The servants panicked, but Tanaquil stopped them. "Don't wake him," she said. "This is a sign." When the boy grew older, Tarquin adopted him, raised him as his own, and eventually married him to his daughter. When Tarquin was assassinated by the vengeful sons of Ancus, Servius seized power. He did not ask the Senate's permission. He simply declared himself king and dared anyone to challenge him. No one did. Servius was different from the kings before him. He cared about the common people, the plebeians, the ones who had no land, no voice, no power. He reorganized the entire city. He conducted a census, counting every citizen, recording their wealth and their families. He divided the people into classes based on property, not birth. He created the Comitia Centuriata, an assembly where even the poor could vote, though the wealthy still held more influence. He built a great wall around the city, enclosing all 7 hills, a defensive barrier that would stand for centuries. Parts of it still exist today, massive blocks of volcanic stone, silent witnesses to his vision. Servius ruled for 44 years. He was respected, even loved. But his end was not peaceful. His son-in-law, another Tarquin, younger and more ruthless, grew impatient. He wanted the throne. And Servius's own daughter, Tullia, whispered poison into her husband's ear. One day, the younger Tarquin walked into the Senate house and sat on the king's throne. When Servius arrived, Tarquin threw him down the steps. The old king, broken and bleeding, tried to crawl home. He didn't make it. Assassins caught him in the street and finished him. And Tullia, driving her chariot through the city, did not stop when she saw her father's body in the road. She drove over it, her wheels crushing his chest, staining her dress with his blood. The younger Tarquin took the throne, and Rome's last king had arrived. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud. He was not called proud because he loved his city. He was called proud because he loved only himself. From the moment he took power, he ruled without the Senate's consent. He made decisions alone, surrounded himself with bodyguards, and executed anyone he suspected of disloyalty. He did not seek the people's love. He demanded their obedience. But he was effective. He completed the Temple of Jupiter, a towering structure that dominated the skyline, its roof gilded with bronze stripped from conquered enemies. He waged successful wars, expanding Rome's influence across Latium. He made treaties, built roads, and turned Rome into a regional power. But his methods were brutal. He taxed the people into poverty to fund his projects. He forced citizens to labor on his building sites, treating them like slaves, and anyone who questioned him disappeared. The people hated him, but they were afraid. And then, his son destroyed everything. Sextus Tarquinius was arrogant, entitled, and cruel. One night, while staying as a guest in the house of his cousin Collatinus, he became obsessed with Collatinus's wife, Lucretia. She was known for her virtue, her loyalty, her grace, and Sextus wanted to possess her, not out of love, but out of a desire to prove he could take whatever he wanted. One night, he returned to the house while Collatinus was away. He came to Lucretia's room with a knife and a threat. If she refused him, he said, he would kill her and a male slave, place their bodies together, and claim he'd caught them in adultery. Her honor would be destroyed. Lucretia, trapped and terrified, had no choice. Afterward, Sextus left, satisfied, as if he'd done nothing wrong. But Lucretia did not stay silent. The next day, she summoned her father and her husband. She told them everything. She named Sextus, and then she said something that would echo through history. My body has been violated, but my mind is innocent. Death will be my witness. She drew a knife from her robes and plunged it into her own chest. She died in her father's arms. Collatinus and Lucretia's father were shattered. But one man, Lucius Junius Brutus, saw something more. Brutus was Tarquin's nephew, a man who had spent years pretending to be a fool to survive his uncle's paranoia. But he was not a fool. He was patient. He was waiting. And now, standing over Lucretia's body, he saw his moment. He pulled the bloody knife from her chest, held it high, and swore an oath. By this blood, most pure before the outrage of the prince, I swear before you, Jupiter, and all the gods, that I will drive Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, his wicked wife, and all his children from Rome. Never again will I or any Roman tolerate a king. The others joined him. They carried Lucretia's body into the forum and showed it to the people. They told the story of what Sextus had done, and the people, already seething with resentment, erupted. The city rose in rebellion. Tarquin was away, besieging a neighboring town. When he returned and found the gates of Rome barred against him, he tried to force his way in. But the people refused. They hurled stones and curses from the walls. Tarquin fled. He went to Etruria, begging for help, promising wealth and power to anyone who would restore him. But Rome would not take him back. The monarchy was over. It was the year 509 before the birth of Christ. And in the space left by the fallen king, something new began to grow. A republic. A government of laws, not men. A system where power was shared, limited, checked. Brutus and Collatinus became the first consuls, two men ruling together for 1 year, each with the power to veto the other. The Senate regained its authority. The people, for the first time, had a voice. Rome would never have a king again, or so they swore. But power, once tasted, is not easily forgotten, and the struggle for it, the endless push and pull between ambition and law, would define Rome for the next 500 years. Chapter 3. The Republic Rises. The monarchy fell in a single night, but building something to replace it took generations. Rome in the year 509 before Christ was a city without a map. No one had tried this before. No one knew if it would work. The people had sworn they would never bow to a king again, but they still needed leadership. They still needed order. So they created something new. 2 consuls, elected every year by the people, would share power equally. Each could command armies, propose laws, preside over the Senate, but each could also veto the other. If one grew too ambitious, the other could stop him. It was a system built on suspicion, on the assumption that no man could be trusted with absolute power. And beneath the consuls, there was the Senate. It was made up of Rome's elders, its most experienced men, landowners, and former magistrates who guided policy and controlled the treasury. The Senate did not make laws, not technically, but it advised. And its advice carried the weight of tradition, of wisdom, of collective memory. Then there were the people themselves, divided into assemblies, the Comitia Centuriata, where citizens voted on war and peace, on consuls and laws, the Comitia Tributa, organized by tribes, which elected lesser officials. It was messy, complicated, slow, but it was theirs. For the first time in history, Rome was ruled not by the will of one man, but by the consent of many. At least, that's how the story was told. In reality, power was still concentrated. The patricians, the old noble families who traced their lineage back to Romulus and the first senators, controlled most of the wealth, most of the land, most of the influence. They filled the Senate. They held the consulships. They made the decisions. The plebeians, the common people, the farmers and craftsmen and labourers, had votes, but their votes did not carry the same weight. And so, almost immediately, the Republic began to fracture. The plebeians were angry. They fought in Rome's wars. They paid Rome's taxes. They built Rome's roads and walls. But they had no real power. They could not hold office. They could not marry into patrician families. And worst of all, they were drowning in debt. When a plebeian borrowed money and could not repay it, the creditor could seize not just his land, but his body. He could be sold into slavery, along with his wife and children. Entire families disappeared into bondage because of bad harvests or unexpected expenses. The plebeians protested. They demanded reform. The patricians ignored them. And so, in the year 494 before Christ, the plebeians did something radical. They left. Thousands of them walked out of the city, up to a hill called the Sacred Mount, and they refused to come back. No soldiers, no labourers, no one to work the fields or man the walls. Rome was paralysed. The patricians panicked. Without the plebeians, there was no army. Without the army, Rome was defenceless. They sent negotiators, promising reforms, promising change. The plebeians had one demand. They wanted their own representatives, officials who could protect them from patrician abuse. Officials who were untouchable, sacred, immune from prosecution. The patricians agreed, and the office of the tribune was born. Tribunes could veto any law, any decision, even a consul's order, if they believed it harmed the plebeians. They could not propose laws themselves, but they could stop anything. They were the people's shield. It was a compromise. It was not equality, but it was a beginning. Over the next 2 centuries, the plebeians would fight for more. The right to hold office, the right to marry patricians, the right to know the laws which had been kept secret, memorized by priests, and used to manipulate the ignorant. In 451 before Christ, the laws were finally written down, the 12 tables. They were carved on bronze tablets and displayed in the forum for everyone to see. The laws were harsh, often brutal, but they were public. No longer could a patrician judge twist justice to favour his friends. Now the rules were clear. An eye for an eye, one law read. If a man breaks another's bone, let his bone be broken. A father may sell his son into slavery 3 times. After the 3rd time, the son is free. If a patron betrays his client, let him be cursed and cast out. The 12 Tables became the foundation of Roman law, the bedrock on which centuries of legal tradition would be built. Every Roman child memorized them. Every Roman citizen knew his rights. The Republic was learning to balance itself, slowly, painfully, one crisis at a time. But while Rome argued with itself, the world outside was not standing still. In 390 before Christ, Rome nearly died. The Gauls came down from the north, a wave of warriors tall and fierce, with long hair and painted shields, shouting in a language the Romans did not understand. They swept through Etruria like a summer storm, burning cities, scattering armies. Rome sent its legions to meet them at the Allia River. It was a disaster. The Roman soldiers, trained and disciplined, broke ranks the moment the Gauls charged. They fled in terror, throwing down their weapons, drowning in the river, trampling each other in their panic. The Gauls cut them down without mercy. 3 days later, the Gauls reached Rome. The city was undefended. Most of the population had fled. Only a handful of soldiers remained on the Capitoline Hill, the highest point, guarding the Temple of Jupiter. Everyone else was gone. The Gauls walked into the Forum unopposed. They looted, burned, and occupied the city for 7 months. The Romans who remained on the Capitoline held out, starving, waiting for relief that did not come. The Gauls tried to climb the hill at night, moving silently, hoping to surprise the defenders. But the sacred geese of Juno, kept in the temple, heard them. They honked and flapped their wings, waking the guards. The Romans fought them off. Barely. Eventually, the Gauls agreed to leave. But they demanded a ransom, 1,000 pounds of gold. The Romans gathered what they could, melting down jewelry, stripping temples, scraping together the payment. When they brought the gold to be weighed, the Gallic chieftain threw his sword onto the scale, adding to the weight. "What is this?" The Romans protested. The chieftain grinned. "Vae victis," he said. Woe to the conquered. The Romans paid. The Gauls left. And Rome vowed never to be humiliated like that again. They rebuilt their walls, thicker and taller. They reorganized their army, making it more flexible, more responsive. They trained harder, fought smarter, and they never forgot. For the next century, Rome expanded slowly, carefully, across central Italy. They fought the Samnites, mountain people tough as iron, in 3 brutal wars that lasted 50 years. They conquered the Latins, their own cousins, the people who spoke their language and worshipped their gods. Every victory brought new territory, new citizens, new strength. But Rome's greatest test was still ahead. In 280 before Christ, a new enemy appeared. Pyrrhus, king of Epirus, a Greek general who fancied himself the next Alexander the Great. He crossed the sea with 25,000 men and 20 war elephants, beasts the Romans had never seen before. Towering, grey, unstoppable, they trampled the Roman lines at the Battle of Heraclea. Rome lost. But Rome did not surrender. Pyrrhus won again at Asculum, but the cost was staggering. Thousands of his best soldiers lay dead. When someone congratulated him on his victory, Pyrrhus replied grimly, "One more victory like this, and I shall be ruined." A Pyrrhic victory. A win that destroys the winner. Rome kept fighting. They learned how to counter the elephants, how to disrupt Pyrrhus's formations. They wore him down, battle by battle, until finally, exhausted and bleeding, Pyrrhus withdrew. Rome had survived. And in surviving, it had learned something vital. It could outlast anyone. Across the sea, on the coast of North Africa, there was another power. Older than Rome. Wealthier than Rome. And just as ambitious. Carthage. It was a city of merchants and sailors, founded by the Phoenicians centuries before Rome even existed. Its ships controlled the western Mediterranean, carrying grain and wine and purple-dyed cloth to every port. Its treasury overflowed with silver from Spanish mines. Carthage was everything Rome was not. Sophisticated, cosmopolitan, rich. And it stood in Rome's way. The two powers had coexisted for years, trading, competing, occasionally cooperating. But by 264 before Christ, the tension had grown unbearable. The spark was Sicily, the island between them, fertile and strategic. Both wanted it. Neither would yield. The First Punic War began. Rome had no navy. Carthage ruled the waves. But Rome did what Rome always did. It learned. Roman engineers captured a Carthaginian warship that had run aground. They studied it, measured it, copied it. Within months, Rome had built a fleet of 100 ships, each one a replica of the enemy's design. But copying a ship is not the same as knowing how to sail it. The Roman sailors were clumsy, inexperienced. So Roman engineers added something new. The corvus, a spiked boarding ramp that could slam down onto an enemy deck, turning a naval battle into a land battle. It worked. Rome won battle after battle, boarding Carthaginian ships, fighting hand to hand, turning the sea red. The war dragged on for 23 years, brutal and exhausting, until finally Carthage sued for peace. Rome took Sicily, its first province beyond the Italian mainland, but Carthage was not finished. The Second Punic War began in 218 before Christ, and it nearly ended Rome. Hannibal Barca, son of a Carthaginian general, swore as a boy that he would destroy Rome. He never forgot that oath. He marched an army from Spain, across southern Gaul, and then did the impossible. He crossed the Alps. In winter, with elephants, it was madness. The mountain passes were narrow, icy, treacherous. Avalanches buried entire units. The cold killed men and animals alike. Tribesmen attacked from the cliffs, rolling boulders down onto the soldiers below. Hannibal lost half his army in those mountains, but he made it through. When he descended into northern Italy, the Romans were waiting. They sent an army to stop him at the Tiber River. Hannibal crushed them. They sent another army. He destroyed it at Lake Trasimene, ambushing the Romans in the fog, driving them into the water, slaughtering 15,000 men in 3 hours. Rome panicked. The Senate appointed a dictator, Fabius Maximus, who refused to fight Hannibal directly. Instead, he shadowed the Carthaginian army, harassing its supply lines, avoiding battle. The Romans hated it. They called Fabius a coward, so they replaced him. They elected 2 new consuls, aggressive and bold, and they sent them with the largest army Rome had ever assembled. 80,000 men. They met Hannibal at Cannae, in southern Italy, in the year 216 before Christ. It was the worst defeat in Roman history. Hannibal let the Romans push into the center of his line, drawing them in, tightening around them like a noose. His cavalry swept around the flanks, encircling the Romans completely. They were trapped, packed so tightly they could barely lift their swords. The slaughter lasted for hours. 50,000 Romans died that day. Consuls, senators, soldiers, all piled in the mud. Hannibal's men collected the rings from the dead nobles, gold and silver, and sent them back to Carthage as proof. Rome should have surrendered. Any other city would have. But Rome did not. The Senate met the next day. They refused to even discuss peace terms. Instead, they raised new armies. They scraped together every man who could hold a spear. They armed slaves, promising them freedom if they fought. They emptied the treasury, sold public land, melted down sacred offerings, and they changed their strategy. They sent a young general, Publius Cornelius Scipio, to Spain to attack Carthage's supply lines. Scipio was brilliant, daring, and relentless. He conquered Carthaginian territories one by one, cutting off Hannibal's reinforcements. Then Scipio did something audacious. He invaded Africa. Hannibal, undefeated in Italy for 15 years, was forced to return home to defend Carthage itself. The 2 generals met at Zama in the year 202 before Christ. This time, Rome won. Scipio used Hannibal's own tactics against him, using cavalry to outflank the Carthaginian elephants, disrupting their formations, breaking their lines. Hannibal's army shattered. Carthage surrendered. Rome took Spain, took Carthage's navy, took its wealth, and it became, for the first time, the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. Scipio earned a new name, Africanus, the conqueror of Africa. But Rome was not satisfied. Not yet. The victory over Carthage opened the world to Rome. Within 50 years, Roman legions marched into Greece, defeated the Macedonian phalanx, and stood in the ruins of Corinth. They conquered Syria, Anatolia, and the kingdoms that had risen from the ashes of Alexander's empire. Roman generals returned home with wagons piled high with gold, silver, art, slaves. They paraded through the streets in triumphs, displaying their captives in chains, their treasures glittering in the sun. Rome was no longer a republic of farmers. It was an empire. And the wealth changed everything. The old values, the simplicity and discipline that had made Rome strong, began to erode. Generals became wealthier than kings. Senators owned estates the size of small countries. Slaves flooded the markets, so cheap that free laborers could not compete. The small farmers, the backbone of the republic, lost their land to the wealthy. They drifted into the city, poor and angry, looking for someone to blame. The republic was fracturing. The Senate was corrupt. The people were restless. And ambitious men began to see opportunity. Men like the Gracchi brothers, who tried to redistribute land to the poor and were murdered by the Senate. Men like Marius, a general who reformed the army and turned soldiers into clients loyal to him, not to Rome. Men like Sulla, who marched his legions into Rome itself, purging his enemies, proving that power no longer came from law, but from the sword. The Republic was dying. It just didn't know it yet. But one man, more ambitious than all the others, was watching, and he was patient. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar, and his shadow would swallow the world. Chapter 4. Caesar's Shadow. By the 1st century before the birth of Christ, the Roman Republic was a house built on a crumbling foundation. On the surface, everything looked strong. The legions were invincible. Roman roads stretched from Spain to Syria. Wealth poured into the city from a dozen conquered provinces. The forum buzzed with debates, elections, the machinery of democracy. But beneath it all, something was rotting. The problem was simple. The Republic had been designed for a city-state, a community of farmers who knew each other's names, who shared the same struggles, who trusted each other enough to share power. But Rome was no longer a city-state. It was an empire. And empires do not run on trust. The Senate, once a council of wise elders, had become a playground for the wealthy. Senators bought votes, bribed officials, and passed laws that protected their own interests. The common people, the plebeians who had fought so hard for representation, watched their power slip away. The soldiers, the men who bled for Rome's glory, returned home to find their farms sold, their families evicted, their sacrifices forgotten. They had conquered the world, but they owned nothing. And so they turned to the only men who offered them hope. The generals, men who promised land, money, and dignity, men who commanded armies loyal not to Rome, but to them personally. The Republic was no longer held together by law. It was held together by the fragile balance between ambitious men who wanted to be the first to break it. The first crack appeared with the Gracchi brothers. Tiberius Gracchus was elected tribune in 133 before Christ. He looked around Rome and saw injustice everywhere. The rich owned vast estates worked by slaves. The poor had nothing. The soldiers who had won Rome's wars came home to poverty. Tiberius proposed a simple solution: redistribute public land. Take back the enormous estates that the wealthy had illegally seized and give small plots to landless citizens. It was legal. It was fair. And the Senate hated it. They called him a radical, a demagogue, a threat to order. When Tiberius pushed the law through anyway, using his power as tribune, the senators decided to act. One afternoon, as Tiberius walked through the forum, a mob of senators and their supporters attacked him. They beat him to death with clubs and broken chair legs. His body was thrown into the Tiber River like garbage. No trial, no charges, just murder. 10 years later, Tiberius's younger brother, Gaius, became tribune. He tried to finish what Tiberius had started. He proposed grain subsidies for the poor, extended citizenship to Rome's Italian allies, and challenged the Senate's monopoly on power. The Senate declared him an enemy of the state. Gaius fled to the Aventine Hill with his supporters. The Senate sent soldiers. 3,000 men died in the streets that day. Gaius ordered his slave to kill him, rather than let the senators take him alive. The message was clear. Anyone who challenged the Senate's power would die. But the message was also clear to the people. The Republic no longer served them. It served only the rich. The next man to challenge the Senate was a general named Gaius Marius. Marius was not a patrician. He came from a small town, the son of a farmer, a man with no noble ancestors, no family connections. The aristocrats mocked him, called him a country bumpkin, a nobody. But Marius could fight. He rose through the ranks on merit, became a hero in Rome's wars in North Africa and Gaul, and was elected consul an unprecedented 7 times. The people loved him. The Senate feared him. Marius did something that changed Rome forever. He reformed the army. Before Marius, Roman soldiers were citizens who owned property. They brought their own weapons, served for a season, then returned to their farms. The army was temporary, part-time, tied to the land. Marius opened the legions to the poor. He gave them equipment, training, and a salary. He promised them land when they retired, and in doing so, he created something new. A professional army, loyal not to Rome, but to the general who paid them. It was brilliant, it was efficient, and it was the beginning of the end. The Senate's champion was Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a patrician general who despised everything Marius represented. The two men had fought together once, but rivalry poisoned their alliance. When Marius tried to strip Sulla of a military command and give it to someone else, Sulla did the unthinkable. He marched his legions on Rome. No Roman general had ever done that before. It was unthinkable, unforgivable, a violation of every law and custom. But Sulla did it anyway. He seized the city, drove Marius into exile, and declared himself dictator. Then he left to fight a war in the east. And while he was gone, Marius returned. The old general, dying and half-mad with rage, retook Rome and slaughtered Sulla's supporters. He died weeks later, but the damage was done. When Sulla returned, he was merciless. He published lists of his enemies, the proscriptions, offering rewards for their heads. Thousands died. Senators, equestrians, anyone who had supported Marius or looked at Sulla the wrong way, their wealth was confiscated, their families destroyed. Sulla reformed the Republic, strengthened the Senate, tried to restore the old order. Then, astonishingly, he resigned. He walked away from absolute power and retired to his country estate, where he died a year later. The Republic had survived. Barely. But the precedent was set. Power came from legions, and any man with enough ambition could take it. One more crack appeared before the Republic finally shattered. In 73 before Christ, a gladiator named Spartacus escaped from a training school in Capua. He was not Roman. He was Thracian, a warrior from the edges of the empire, enslaved, forced to fight for the entertainment of his masters. He gathered other escaped slaves, gladiators, and field workers, and household servants, men and women who had nothing to lose. They armed themselves with kitchen knives and farming tools, fled into the mountains, and waited for Rome to come. Rome sent soldiers. Spartacus destroyed them. Rome sent more. Spartacus crushed them too. His army grew. Tens of thousands of slaves, desperate and furious, joined him. They defeated Roman legions in open battle, raided towns, burned estates. For 2 years, Spartacus held southern Italy hostage. Rome was humiliated. How could slaves, the lowest of the low, defeat Roman soldiers? Finally, the Senate gave command to Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome. Crassus was ruthless. He restored discipline to the legions through decimation, executing every 10th man in units that had fled from battle. Then, he trapped Spartacus in the toe of Italy and crushed him. 6,000 captured slaves were crucified along the Appian Way, the road from Capua to Rome. Their bodies hung for months, rotting in the sun, a warning to anyone who dared challenge Rome's power. Spartacus died fighting, sword in hand, buried somewhere beneath a pile of Roman dead. But his rebellion proved something. The Republic was fragile. Its armies could be beaten. Its authority could be defied. And men were watching. 3 men stood at the center of Roman power in the year 60 before Christ. Pompey the Great, Rome's most successful general, conqueror of the East, beloved by the people, arrogant and hungry for glory. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in the world, who had put down Spartacus and now wanted the respect he believed his wealth deserved. And Gaius Julius Caesar, a patrician with an ancient name and almost no money, charming and brilliant and drowning in debt. Each man wanted something. Pompey wanted land for his veterans, recognition from the Senate. Crassus wanted a military command to prove he was more than a banker. Caesar wanted power, plain and simple. The Senate refused all of them, so they made a deal. Privately, quietly, they agreed to support each other. They would use their combined influence to get what they wanted. Pompey's soldiers, Crassus's money, Caesar's cunning. It was not official. It had no legal standing. But it worked. They called it a friendship. History calls it the First Triumvirate. Caesar was elected consul. He pushed through Pompey's laws, secured land for the veterans, and gave Crassus a financial settlement in the east. In return, they made sure Caesar got what he wanted: command of Gaul. Gaul was everything north of Italy, a vast expanse of forests and rivers and tribes, wealthy and dangerous and unconquered. Caesar was given command of 4 legions and 5 years to do whatever he wanted. He spent the next 9 years turning Gaul into a graveyard. Caesar was not just a general. He was a writer, a politician, a showman. He documented everything, sending dispatches back to Rome, describing his victories, his strategies, his triumphs. The commentaries on the Gallic War became a bestseller, read aloud in the Forum, copied and circulated, making Caesar a legend. He fought the Helvetii, the Germanic tribes, the Belgae. He crossed the Rhine River, the first Roman to do so, and built a bridge in 10 days just to prove he could. He invaded Britain, twice, though he never conquered it. He was ruthless. When the Gallic tribes resisted, he burned their villages, sold entire populations into slavery, and executed their leaders. At the siege of Alesia, he built 2 walls, one to keep the defenders in, one to keep reinforcements out, and starved an entire city into submission. Historians estimate that Caesar's conquest of Gaul killed 1 million people and enslaved another million. But to Rome, he was a hero. He sent gold back to the city, enough to fund public works, games, bribes. He made himself indispensable, and he made the Senate very, very nervous. While Caesar was in Gaul, the triumvirate began to fall apart. Crassus, jealous of Caesar and Pompey's military glory, demanded his own command. He wanted to conquer Parthia, the great empire to the east, and prove he was their equal. He invaded with 40,000 men. The Parthians destroyed him at the Battle of Carrhae. They lured the Romans into the desert, surrounded them with horse archers, and shot them to pieces. Crassus died, betrayed during a parley, and the Parthians mockingly poured molten gold down his throat, a symbol of his greed. His head was sent to the Parthian king, who used it as a prop in a play. With Crassus dead, only Pompey and Caesar remained, and they no longer trusted each other. Pompey stayed in Rome, growing closer to the Senate, accepting titles and honors, becoming the Republic's defender. Caesar stayed in Gaul, growing stronger, building loyalty among his legions. The Senate saw the danger. They ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar knew what that meant. Without his legions, he would be prosecuted, exiled, or killed. His enemies would destroy him. So he made a choice. The Rubicon River was small, barely worth noticing. It marked the northern boundary of Italy, the line between Caesar's province and Rome itself. Roman law was clear. No general could cross that border with an army. To do so was treason. To do so meant civil war. Caesar stood on the northern bank in January of 49 before Christ. 1 legion waited behind him. The rest were days away. If he crossed, there was no going back. His officers urged caution. His friends warned him. But Caesar had made his decision. He looked at the river, the shallow water moving slowly over stones, and he said the words that would echo forever. Alia iacta est. The die is cast. He crossed. The moment his soldiers stepped into Italy, the Republic died. It would take years for the body to stop moving, but the heart had already stopped beating. Pompey and the Senate fled Rome. Caesar entered the city unopposed. He did not loot it, did not burn it, did not kill his enemies. He simply took control. Pompey gathered an army in Greece. Caesar followed. They met at Pharsalus in 48 before Christ. Caesar was outnumbered 2-1, but his veterans, hardened by Gaul, were better trained, more disciplined. They shattered Pompey's lines. Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping for sanctuary. Instead, the Egyptians killed him, cut off his head, and presented it to Caesar as a gift. Caesar wept when he saw it. Whether from genuine grief or political theatre, no one knows. Caesar stayed in Egypt, drawn into a civil war between the young pharaoh Ptolemy and his sister Cleopatra. Cleopatra was 21, brilliant and desperate. She smuggled herself into Caesar's chambers, rolled up in a carpet, and emerged at his feet. She spoke 9 languages, debated philosophy, and understood power better than most men twice her age. Caesar was 52, greying, balding, and captivated. He sided with Cleopatra, defeated her brother, and placed her on the throne of Egypt. They became lovers. She bore him a son, Caesarion, and for a time Caesar lived in Alexandria, seduced by the luxury and wisdom of the ancient world. But Rome called him back. Caesar returned to a republic that barely existed. He was made dictator, first for 10 years, then for life. He reformed the calendar, giving us the system we still use today. He expanded the Senate, filled it with his supporters, built new colonies for his veterans. He was generous to his enemies, pardoning those who had fought against him, inviting them back into public life. "I will not repeat Sulla's mistake," he said. But generosity is not the same as trust. The senators smiled to his face and sharpened their knives in private. They called him king in all but name. And they remembered their oath. Never again. On the 15th of March, 44 before Christ, the Ides of March, Caesar went to the Senate house. His wife, Calpurnia, begged him not to go. She had dreamed of his death. A soothsayer had warned him. Beware the Ides of March. Caesar ignored them all. As he entered, the conspirators surrounded him. More than 60 senators were involved, but only a few held knives. They struck. The first blade went into his side. Caesar tried to fight back, but the others closed in. They stabbed him 23 times, in the chest, the back, the neck. When Caesar saw Brutus, the man he had loved like a son, among the attackers, he stopped resisting. "Et tu, Brute," he whispered. "And you, Brutus." Then he pulled his toga over his face and died at the foot of Pompey's statue. The conspirators stood over his body, bloodied and triumphant, believing they had saved the Republic. They were wrong. The senators expected gratitude. They expected cheers. They expected Rome to celebrate the tyrant's death. Instead, the city erupted in chaos. The people loved Caesar. He had given them bread, games, land, hope. They did not care about the Republic's principles or the Senate's fears. They only knew that Caesar had been murdered by the same men who had failed them for decades. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal lieutenant, seized the moment. At Caesar's funeral, Antony gave a speech. He read Caesar's will, which left money to every citizen and his gardens to the public. He held up Caesar's blood-stained toga, showing the knife holes, counting the wounds. "Here is where Brutus stabbed him," Antony said, his voice breaking. "Here is where Cassius struck, and here, the unkindest cut of all." The crowd roared. They rioted through the streets, hunting the conspirators, burning their homes. Brutus and Cassius fled the city, their mission a failure. But Antony was not the only one who wanted Caesar's legacy. There was a boy, barely 18, sickly and unknown, who had been studying in Greece when Caesar died. Caesar's will named him as his adopted heir. His name was Gaius Octavius. But soon he would call himself Caesar, and one day the world would call him Augustus. Octavian, as he was called then, returned to Rome and demanded his inheritance. Antony laughed at him, dismissed him as a child playing at power, but Octavian was patient. He gathered Caesar's veterans, promised them land and glory, and slowly built his own army. He allied with the Senate against Antony, then betrayed the Senate and allied with Antony against them. Antony, Octavian, and a general named Lepidus formed the second triumvirate. Unlike the first, this one was official, legal, and brutal. They published proscription lists, just as Sulla had done. Thousands died. Senators, equestrians, anyone with wealth or influence. Cicero, the great orator who had spoken out against tyranny, was hunted down and beheaded. His head and hands were nailed to the speaker's platform in the Forum, silencing his voice forever. The triumvirate marched east. At Philippi, in Greece, they faced Brutus and Cassius, the last defenders of the Republic. The battle was bloody, chaotic, desperate. Cassius, seeing his lines falter, fell on his sword. Brutus, surrounded and defeated, did the same. The Republic was dead. Everyone knew it now. All that remained was the question: who would rule the empire? Antony took the east, wealthy and seductive, and fell in love with Cleopatra, the woman who had once captivated Caesar. Together, they ruled from Alexandria, living like gods, hosting banquets that lasted for days, dreaming of an empire that spanned both Rome and Egypt. Octavian stayed in Rome, quiet and calculating, building support, playing the role of dutiful Roman, reminding people that Antony had abandoned them for a foreign queen. The final confrontation came at Actium, a naval battle off the coast of Greece, in 31 before Christ. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his loyal general Agrippa, surrounded Antony and Cleopatra. The battle was decided before it began. Antony's ships, heavy and slow, could not maneuver. Cleopatra fled. Antony followed. A year later, with Octavian's armies closing in on Alexandria, Antony stabbed himself. He died in Cleopatra's arms. Cleopatra tried to negotiate, tried to seduce Octavian as she had Caesar. But Octavian was not interested. He was cold, practical, untouchable. Cleopatra chose death. She let a poisonous asp bite her, dying as a queen rather than a captive. Egypt became a Roman province, and Octavian stood alone, the last man standing, the heir to Caesar's dream. He returned to Rome victorious, and he began to build something new. Not a republic, not a dictatorship, an empire. Chapter 5. Pax Romana, the Golden Cage. The young man who returned to Rome in 29 before Christ was no longer the sickly teenager who had begged for his inheritance. Octavian was 33 years old. He had survived civil war, betrayal, and battle. He had outlasted every rival, outlived every enemy. He stood at the center of a world that stretched from Spain to Syria, from the Rhine to the Nile, and he understood something that Caesar had not. Romans hated kings. They would tolerate power, even absolute power, as long as you did not call it that. So Octavian gave them a fiction, a beautiful, elaborate lie that everyone agreed to believe. In 27 before Christ, he stood before the Senate and made a speech. He announced that he was restoring the Republic. He was returning power to the Senate and the people. He was stepping down from his extraordinary position. The Senate, filled with men who owed him everything, panicked. They begged him to stay. They offered him titles, honors, authority, and after the appropriate amount of hesitation, Octavian graciously accepted. They gave him a new name, Augustus, the revered one. He refused to be called king or dictator. Instead, he called himself princeps, first citizen, just a man, serving his country, nothing more. But in reality, he controlled everything. He commanded all the legions. He controlled the treasury. He appointed governors. He made laws. The Senate still met, still debated, still voted. But they voted the way Augustus wanted. It was genius. Augustus had created something new. Not a republic. Not a monarchy. An empire disguised as a republic. A system that would endure for centuries. And he gave Rome something it had not known for 100 years. Peace. The Pax Romana. The Roman peace. For the first time in generations, the gates of the Temple of Janus closed. Italy was safe. The provinces were stable. Trade flowed freely across an empire, bound together by roads and laws and a single language. Augustus poured money into building projects. He boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Temples rose across the capital. The Forum was expanded, filled with monuments to victory and virtue. Aqueducts brought fresh water to every neighborhood. Public baths, libraries, theaters, all free for citizens. Augustus reformed the government, creating a professional bureaucracy to manage the empire. He established the Praetorian Guard, elite soldiers who served as his personal bodyguards. He reorganized the provinces, sending competent governors instead of corrupt senators looking to steal whatever they could. He promoted traditional Roman values: duty, discipline, family. He passed laws encouraging marriage and childbearing, punishing adultery and luxury. He positioned himself as the protector of Rome's ancient customs, even as he quietly dismantled every check on his power. And the people loved him for it. They did not care that the Republic was dead. They cared that the bread was cheap, the water was clean, and their sons were not dying in civil wars. Augustus ruled for 41 years, longer than anyone expected, long enough to make the new system feel permanent. But he had one problem. He had no son. Augustus was married 3 times. His first 2 wives gave him only a daughter, Julia. His third wife, Livia, had 2 sons from a previous marriage, but neither was Augustus's blood. He tried to solve the problem by adoption. He adopted his nephew Marcellus and groomed him as heir. Marcellus died young. He adopted his grandsons, Gaius and Lucius. They both died before reaching adulthood. People whispered, 3 heirs dead. Was it bad luck? Or was Livia, cold and calculating, poisoning anyone who stood between her sons and the throne? No one could prove anything, but the suspicions never went away. Finally, with no other options, Augustus adopted Livia's son, Tiberius. A capable general, but dour, suspicious, and resentful. Tiberius had been forced to divorce his beloved wife to marry Augustus's daughter Julia, a marriage that made both of them miserable. Augustus did not trust Tiberius. Tiberius did not love Augustus. But the empire needed an heir. In 14 after the birth of Christ, Augustus died at the age of 75. He had ruled so long that no living Roman remembered life before him. His last words, according to legend, were a question to those gathered at his bedside. Have I played my part well? They assured him he had. Rome deified him, declared him a god, and built temples in his honor. And Tiberius, reluctant and bitter, became the second emperor. The age of Augustus was over. The age of the emperors had begun. Tiberius did not want to be emperor. He was 55 years old when Augustus died, a soldier who preferred military camps to marble palaces, a man more comfortable giving orders than receiving flattery. He took power because he had no choice, because the alternative was chaos. For the first years, he ruled competently. He was careful with money, avoided unnecessary wars, and let the Senate handle much of the day-to-day governance. But he hated Rome. He hated the constant scrutiny, the endless politicking, the senators who smiled to his face and plotted behind his back. In 26 after Christ, he left. He retired to the island of Capri and never returned to the capital. He ruled from a distance, sending letters, issuing orders, while his praetorian prefect, Sejanus, controlled Rome. Sejanus was ambitious, ruthless, and loyal only to himself. He executed anyone he considered a threat, turned the Praetorian Guard into his personal army, and may have been planning to seize the throne. When Tiberius finally realized the danger, he had Sejanus arrested and executed. The purges that followed were brutal. Dozens of senators died. Tiberius became paranoid, cruel, isolated. Stories spread about the horrors on Capri, though how much was truth and how much was propaganda, no one knows. He died in 37 after Christ, possibly smothered with a pillow by the prefect of the Praetorian Guard. No one mourned him. The people celebrated in the streets. His heir was his 24-year-old grandnephew, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. History remembers him by his nickname, Caligula, Little Boots. Caligula began well. He was young, handsome, charming, the son of a beloved general. He granted amnesty to exiles, abolished treason trials, held games and spectacles, and spent money lavishly. The people adored him. Then, 6 months into his reign, he fell ill. A fever, severe and sudden, that left him unconscious for days. When he recovered, something had changed. Maybe the illness damaged his mind. Maybe power corrupted him. Maybe the ancient sources, written by senators who hated him, exaggerated everything. But the man who emerged from that sickness was different. He declared himself a god, not after death, like Augustus, but immediately. He built temples to himself, demanded worship, and claimed to speak with Jupiter as an equal. He humiliated the Senate, forcing senators to run beside his chariot, appointing his horse as a priest. He emptied the treasury on wild projects, building a floating bridge across the Bay of Naples, just so he could ride across it, wearing Alexander's breastplate. He executed people on a whim. Anyone who displeased him. Anyone who looked at him wrong. He invited senators to dinner and had them killed between courses. The stories grew wilder. That he slept with his sisters. That he ordered his soldiers to attack the sea with their swords, collecting seashells as spoils of war. That he opened a brothel in the palace. How much is true? Impossible to say. But in 41 after Christ, the Praetorian Guard decided they had seen enough. Officers cornered Caligula in a palace corridor and stabbed him to death. They killed his wife. They murdered his infant daughter, smashing her head against a wall. The Julio-Claudian dynasty should have ended there. But the guards found Caligula's uncle hiding behind a curtain, terrified, trembling, sure he would be next. His name was Claudius, and the guards, needing an emperor, dragged him out and proclaimed him on the spot. No one expected Claudius to be a good emperor. He stuttered. He limped. He drooled when he was nervous. His own family had mocked him his entire life, kept him out of public view, considered him an embarrassment. But Claudius was not stupid. He had spent his life in libraries, studying history, writing books, learning how empires actually worked. He surprised everyone. Claudius reformed the bureaucracy, making it more efficient. He expanded citizenship to provincials, recognizing that Rome's strength came from including others, not excluding them. He built aqueducts, roads, and the great harbour at Ostia. And he conquered Britain. Where Caesar had raided and left, Claudius invaded and stayed. In 43 after Christ, Roman legions landed on the shores of Britain, fought their way inland, and began the long process of subduing the island. It was Rome's first major conquest in decades. Claudius ruled for 13 years. He was effective, practical, and surprisingly competent. But his personal life was a disaster. His third wife, Messalina, was notorious for her affairs, her cruelty, and her ambition. When she conspired to overthrow him, Claudius had her executed. His fourth wife, Agrippina, was worse. She was cunning, ruthless, and determined to see her son by a previous marriage become emperor. She convinced Claudius to adopt the boy, to make him heir over Claudius's own son. The boy's name was Nero. In 54 after Christ, Claudius died, probably poisoned, probably by Agrippina, who fed him mushrooms laced with toxins. Nero became emperor at 16, and Rome's nightmare began. Nero started as a reformer, guided by his tutor, the philosopher Seneca, and the Praetorian prefect Burrus. He governed reasonably well. He reduced taxes, improved justice, and avoided unnecessary cruelty. But Nero had other passions. He wanted to be an artist, a poet, a musician. He performed in public theatres, sang at festivals, competed in chariot races. To a Roman aristocrat, this was shameful. Emperors did not perform like common actors, but Nero did not care. He craved applause, adoration, artistic recognition. Then he started killing. He had his mother murdered, tired of her control, her manipulation. He had his wife killed so he could marry his mistress. He executed senators, confiscated estates, and grew increasingly paranoid. In 64 after Christ, a massive fire swept through Rome. It burned for 6 days, destroying entire neighborhoods. Nero was away when it started, but rumors spread that he had started the fire himself to clear space for a new palace. Nero needed a scapegoat. He blamed the Christians, a small, strange sect that worshipped a crucified Jewish preacher. He had them arrested, tortured, and executed in horrific ways. Some were burned alive as human torches to light his gardens. Others were torn apart by dogs in the arena. It was Rome's first major persecution of Christians, and it would not be the last. Nero built his Golden House, a vast palace complex that covered a huge portion of the city, filled with gardens, lakes, and a colossal statue of himself. Finally, he said, I can live like a human being. But the money was running out. The people were suffering, and the legions, far from Rome, began to rebel. In 68 after Christ, the governor of Spain declared himself emperor. Other provinces joined him. The Praetorian Guard abandoned Nero. Nero fled Rome, alone and terrified. As soldiers closed in, he could not bring himself to commit suicide. His secretary had to help him drive the blade into his own throat. His last words were, "What an artist dies in me." The Julio-Claudian dynasty ended, and Rome, for the first time since Augustus, had no clear successor. The civil war that followed, the year of the four emperors, nearly tore the empire apart. When the chaos finally settled, a general named Vespasian emerged victorious. He was not a patrician. He came from a family of tax collectors, a man who had risen through merit, not birth. He was practical, gruff, and utterly unpretentious. When he became emperor in 69 after Christ, he did something revolutionary. He laughed at himself. Where previous emperors had demanded worship, Vespasian made jokes. "I think I'm becoming a god," he said on his deathbed, mocking the tradition of deification. He rebuilt Rome. Literally, he filled in Nero's lake and built the Flavian amphitheatre on the site. History knows it as the Colosseum. It was a gift to the people, a statement that the emperor served Rome, not the other way around. 50,000 spectators could watch gladiators fight, criminals executed, exotic animals slaughtered, all for free. Vespasian ruled for 10 years, restored the treasury, and died peacefully in bed, the first emperor in decades to do so. His son Titus succeeded him. Titus was young, popular, generous. His reign lasted only 2 years, but he faced disaster after disaster with grace. In 79 after Christ, Mount Vesuvius erupted. The cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum vanished beneath ash and fire. Thousands died. Titus personally oversaw the relief efforts, spending imperial funds to help survivors. A fire swept through Rome, then a plague. Titus responded with compassion, opening the palace to refugees, draining the treasury to rebuild. When he died suddenly in 81 after Christ, probably from illness, the people wept. He had been emperor for only 2 years, but they called him the delight of the human race. His brother Domitian succeeded him, and the Golden Age ended. Domitian was capable, but paranoid. He strengthened the borders, reformed the administration, but he saw conspiracies everywhere. He executed senators, confiscated property, demanded to be called master and god. In 96 after Christ, his own household staff, tired of his cruelty, murdered him in his bedroom. The Senate chose an elderly senator, Nerva, to replace him. Nerva was kind, decent, and weak. He lasted 2 years before dying of natural causes. But Nerva did something brilliant. He adopted as his heir the most capable general in the empire, a Spaniard named Trajan. It set a precedent. For the next 80 years, each emperor would adopt the best man available as his successor, creating a period of stability and prosperity unmatched in Roman history. The 5 good emperors. Trajan ruled from 98 to 117 after Christ. He was a soldier's emperor, beloved by the legions, respected by the Senate, admired by the people. He expanded the empire to its greatest extent. He conquered Dacia, rich in gold mines, and used the wealth to fund massive building projects. He built Trajan's Forum, Trajan's Market, Trajan's Column, monuments that still stand today. He pushed east into Parthia, briefly capturing their capital, reaching the Persian Gulf. No Roman army had ever gone so far. The Senate declared him Optimus Princeps, the best ruler. When he died, his ashes were placed in the base of his column, the only person ever buried inside the city limits of Rome. His successor, Hadrian, was the opposite. Where Trajan conquered, Hadrian consolidated. He withdrew from Parthia, recognizing that the empire was overstretched. He built walls. Hadrian's wall in Britain, fortifications along the Rhine and Danube, clear boundaries that said, "This far and no farther." Hadrian travelled constantly, visiting every province, inspecting troops, settling disputes. He was cultured, educated, fluent in Greek, a lover of philosophy and art. He fell in love with a young man from Bithynia named Antinous. When Antinous drowned in the Nile, possibly a suicide, Hadrian was devastated. He founded a city in his honor, declared him a god, and erected statues of him across the empire. Hadrian ruled for 21 years and left the empire stronger than he found it. Antoninus Pius ruled next, from 138 to 161 after Christ. His reign was so peaceful, so stable, that historians struggle to find anything dramatic to say about it. No wars, no rebellions, no crises, just competent, quiet governance. It was the calmest period in Roman history, and people took it for granted. The last of the 5 good emperors was Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king. He ruled from 161 to 180 after Christ, and he spent most of it at war. The Parthians invaded the east. Germanic tribes pushed across the Danube. A plague swept through the empire, killing millions. Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations, reflections on Stoic philosophy, while sitting in a military tent on the freezing northern frontier. He did not want to be emperor. He wanted to study, to think, to live quietly. But duty called, and he answered. He died at 58, worn down by war and sickness, on the Danube frontier. And he made a mistake. Instead of adopting the best man to succeed him, he left the throne to his son. His son's name was Commodus, and everything Marcus Aurelius had built began to crumble. Commodus was everything his father was not. Where Marcus Aurelius was disciplined, Commodus was indulgent. Where Marcus meditated, Commodus threw parties. Where Marcus fought barbarians, Commodus fought as a gladiator in the arena, humiliating the office and enraging the Senate. He renamed Rome after himself. He declared himself the reincarnation of Hercules. He executed anyone who displeased him, confiscated their wealth, and spent it on games and circuses. In 192 after Christ, his advisors and mistress conspired to kill him. They poisoned his wine. When that did not work, they sent a wrestler to strangle him in his bath. His death triggered another civil war. The Praetorian Guard auctioned the throne to the highest bidder. Multiple generals declared themselves emperor. Eventually, Septimius Severus, a general from North Africa, fought his way to power. He brought stability, but at a cost. Severus made the army supreme. He raised soldiers' pay, gave them privileges, and made it clear, loyalty to the emperor, not the Senate or the people, was what mattered. Enrich the soldiers, he told his sons on his deathbed. Ignore everyone else. It was a dangerous precedent. The 3rd century after Christ was a nightmare. In 50 years, Rome had over 20 emperors. Most died violently. Some ruled for months, some for weeks. Generals fought each other. Provinces broke away. Barbarians invaded. The economy collapsed. Inflation spiraled out of control. Plague returned again and again, killing millions. The empire fragmented. Gaul and Britain declared independence under their own emperors. The East split off under the Palmyrene Empire, ruled by a queen named Zenobia. Rome should have fallen, but it did not. One emperor, Aurelian, clawed the empire back together. He defeated Zenobia, reconquered Gaul, and built massive walls around Rome itself, the first time the city had needed fortifications in centuries. He earned the title Restorer of the World. But the damage was done. The empire had changed. The old certainties were gone. And the man who finally stabilized Rome would do so by transforming it completely. Chapter 6. Crisis and Transformation. By the year 284 after Christ, Rome had survived the impossible. 50 years of civil war, emperors murdered by their own soldiers, provinces seceding, barbarians pouring across every frontier, plague sweeping through cities, leaving streets empty and crops rotting in the fields. The silver currency debased so many times that coins were barely worth the metal they were stamped on. The empire had not fallen, but it had come closer than anyone wanted to admit. The problem was simple. The army had become kingmaker. Legions no longer swore loyalty to Rome. They swore loyalty to their generals, and when a general was proclaimed emperor by his troops, he had to keep them happy. He had to pay them, give them bonuses, let them loot, and when the money ran out, they killed him and found someone else. It was a cycle of violence that fed on itself. No emperor could rule long enough to fix the problems. No reform could survive the next assassination. But in 284, a soldier named Diocletian became emperor, and he understood something the others had not. One man could no longer rule Rome. The empire was too vast, too complex, too broken. So Diocletian did something unprecedented. He divided it. Diocletian created the Tetrarchy, rule by 4. He named himself Augustus of the East and chose a loyal general, Maximian, as Augustus of the West. Beneath each Augustus, he appointed a Caesar, a junior emperor who would govern a portion of the empire and eventually succeed his Augustus. It was brilliant. 4 rulers meant 4 armies, 4 courts, 4 centers of power. Rebellions could be crushed quickly. Borders could be defended simultaneously. And when an Augustus retired, his Caesar would step up, ensuring smooth succession. Diocletian ruled from Nicomedia in the east, Maximian from Milan in the west. Rome itself was no longer the center of power. It was becoming a symbol, a relic, while the real work of empire happened elsewhere. Diocletian reformed everything. He reorganized the provinces, splitting them into smaller, more manageable units. He separated military and civilian authority, so that no governor could command an army and rebel. He restructured the tax system, demanding payments in goods instead of worthless currency. And he tried to stop inflation with the edict on maximum prices, fixing the cost of everything from bread to silk to a day laborer's wage. It did not work. Price controls never do. But the attempt showed how desperate the situation had become. Diocletian was ruthless. He crushed rebellions without mercy. He executed corrupt officials. He demanded loyalty, efficiency, results, and he persecuted Christians. Christianity had been growing for centuries, spreading through the empire like water seeping through stone. It was no longer a small Jewish sect. It was a movement, with churches in every city, believers in every province. To Diocletian, Christians were a threat. They refused to worship the emperor. They refused to sacrifice to the Roman gods. They claimed loyalty to a higher power, a kingdom not of this world. In 303 after Christ, Diocletian issued an edict. Churches were to be destroyed. Scriptures were to be burned. Christians who refused to sacrifice to the gods would lose their property, their rights, their lives. The great persecution began. Thousands died. Some were burned alive. Some were fed to animals in the arena. Some were beheaded, drowned, tortured, until they renounced their faith. But many did not renounce it. They died singing hymns, praying, forgiving their executioners. And their courage made more converts. Diocletian could not understand it. He could break armies, crush rebellions, reform empires, but he could not break faith. In 305 after Christ, Diocletian did something no emperor had done since Sulla. He retired. He was exhausted, sick, tired of the endless struggle. He convinced Maximian to step down with him, and they both abdicated, passing power to their Caesars as planned. Diocletian retired to a palace in Split, on the Dalmatian coast, and spent his final years growing cabbages in his garden. When his former colleagues begged him to return to fix the chaos that erupted after his departure, he refused. "If you could see the cabbages I have grown," he said, "you would not ask me to give up this peace." He died in 316, quietly, far from the throne. The Tetrarchy collapsed almost immediately. The Caesars fought each other. Their sons declared themselves emperors. Civil war returned. But one man emerged from the chaos stronger than all the others. A man who would transform Rome in ways Diocletian never imagined. His name was Constantine. Before Constantine could rise, the empire had to tear itself apart one more time. When Diocletian retired, the succession should have been smooth. But ambition does not follow plans. Sons of emperors, nephews, generals, all claimed the throne. The Tetrarchy fractured into warlords fighting for dominance. By 312 after Christ, there were 4 men claiming to be emperor. Constantine controlled Britain and Gaul. Maxentius held Italy and North Africa. Licinius ruled the Balkans. Maximinus commanded the east. Constantine marched on Rome. He was outnumbered, but he was bold, and he had something Maxentius did not: a vision. The night before the battle, Constantine claimed he saw a sign in the sky, a cross of light, with words written beneath it, in hoc signo vinces. In this sign, you will conquer. Constantine ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol, the Chi Rho, on their shields. The next day, at the Milvian Bridge just outside Rome, they met Maxentius's army. Maxentius had the larger force, but Constantine had momentum. The battle was brutal, chaotic, and decisive. Maxentius's troops broke. They fled toward the Tiber, trying to cross the bridge. The bridge collapsed under the weight. Maxentius drowned in the river, dragged down by his armor. Constantine entered Rome victorious, and he did something extraordinary. He credited his victory to the Christian God. Constantine was not baptized. He still worshipped the old gods, at least publicly, but he recognized something profound. Christianity was the future. It was growing faster than any force could stop it. It had survived persecution, martyrdom, and imperial wrath. Its believers were loyal, organized, and willing to die for their faith. Constantine saw an opportunity. If he could harness that loyalty, if he could make Christianity and Rome synonymous, he could create a foundation stronger than any army. In 313 after Christ, Constantine and Licinius issued the Edict of Milan. Christianity was no longer illegal. Christians could worship freely, build churches, own property. The persecutions ended. It was not yet the official religion of Rome, but it was protected, encouraged, elevated. Constantine went further. He funded the construction of churches. He gave bishops political power. He exempted clergy from taxes. He called the Council of Nicaea in 325, gathering hundreds of bishops to settle theological disputes and define Orthodox Christian belief. The Nicene Creed, still recited in churches today, came from that council. Constantine did not write it, but he enforced it. He was shaping Christianity even as it shaped him, and he was reshaping Rome itself. Constantine looked at the empire and saw a problem. Rome, the eternal city, was in the west. But the wealth, the threats, the future, all lay in the east. So he built a new capital. He chose Byzantium, an ancient Greek city on the Bosporus, the narrow strait connecting Europe and Asia, the Black Sea, and the Mediterranean. It was perfectly positioned, defensible, wealthy, strategic. Constantine poured resources into transforming it. He built massive walls, churches, palaces, forums. He moved thousands of families, relocated senators, and filled the city with art looted from across the empire. In 330 after Christ, he renamed it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. It was a new Rome, a Christian Rome, a city that would outlive the original by 1,000 years. Constantine ruled until 337. He reunited the empire, defeated his rivals, and established a dynasty. But he also set Rome on a path it could not turn back from. The old gods were fading. The temples were emptying. Christianity was becoming the soul of the empire. Constantine was baptized on his deathbed, finally and fully embracing the faith he had championed. He died believing he had saved Rome. In a way, he had. But he had also transformed it into something unrecognizable to the Romans, who had founded the Republic 1,000 years before. After Constantine died, his 3 sons divided the empire and immediately began fighting each other. Constantius II eventually emerged victorious, but only after years of bloodshed. He was pious, zealous, and determined to make Christianity the only religion in Rome. He closed pagan temples. He banned sacrifices. He executed anyone caught practicing the old rites. Christianity was no longer just protected. It was mandatory. But not everyone agreed with the new order. Constantine's nephew, Julian, was raised Christian but secretly studied the old philosophies. When he became emperor in 361, he tried to reverse everything. Julian reopened the temples, restored pagan priests, and argued that Christianity had weakened Rome. He called for a return to the virtues of the ancestors, the gods who had made Rome great. The Christians called him Julian the Apostate, the betrayer. Julian ruled for only 2 years. He died in battle against the Persians in 363, struck by a spear, his blood staining the sand. Legend says his last words were, "You have conquered, Galilean." Whether he actually said it, no one knows. But the message was clear. Christianity had won. The empire continued to fracture. In 378, at the Battle of Adrianople, Gothic tribes destroyed a Roman army and killed the Emperor Valens. It was the worst Roman defeat since Cannae, 600 years before. The Goths were not invaders in the traditional sense. They were refugees, fleeing the Huns, begging for sanctuary inside the empire. Rome had let them in, then mistreated them, starved them, enslaved them, and the Goths had fought back. The battle proved something terrible. Rome's borders were no longer secure. The legions were no longer invincible. The barbarians were inside the gates. In 395 after Christ, the Emperor Theodosius I died, and with him died any hope of keeping the empire united. He divided it between his 2 sons. Honorius took the west. Arcadius took the east. It was meant to be temporary. It became permanent. The 2 halves of the empire drifted apart, spoke different languages, worshipped in different ways. The west spoke Latin, clung to Roman traditions. The east spoke Greek, embraced Hellenistic culture. They were still technically one empire, but in reality they were becoming 2 different worlds. And the west was dying. The 5th century after Christ was the last gasp of Roman rule in the west. Barbarian tribes controlled most of the provinces. Visigoths, Vandals, Franks, Burgundians, Saxons. They were not mindless destroyers. Many had lived inside the empire for generations. They spoke Latin, worshipped the Christian God, admired Roman culture. They simply no longer obeyed Roman authority. In 410, Alaric the Visigoth did the unthinkable. He sacked Rome. The city had not fallen to a foreign enemy in 800 years. The shock was profound. Jerome, the scholar who translated the Bible into Latin, wrote from his monastery in Bethlehem, "The city which took the whole world captive has itself been captured." But Alaric did not destroy Rome. He looted it, took what he wanted, and left. The city survived. But its invincibility was shattered. In the decades that followed, the Western Empire became a puppet show. Real power lay with barbarian generals who commanded the armies. Emperors were crowned and deposed at their whim, powerless figureheads with impressive titles and no authority. The Huns, under Attila, terrorized both halves of the empire. Attila was called the Scourge of God, a barbarian king whose horse archers could strike anywhere, burning cities, enslaving populations, demanding tribute. Rome bought him off, paid him gold, sent him hostages, anything to avoid fighting him. In 452, Attila invaded Italy. He destroyed city after city, moving toward Rome itself. The emperor fled. The people panicked. But Pope Leo, the first bishop of Rome, rode out to meet Attila personally. What they discussed, no one knows. But Attila turned back. He withdrew from Italy and died the next year. Some said it was divine intervention. Others said Leo paid him. Either way, Rome survived. Barely. In 476 after Christ, the end came quietly. A barbarian general named Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus. The boy's name was cruelly ironic. Romulus, after the founder. Augustulus, little Augustus. Odoacer did not declare himself emperor. He simply sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople and said there was no longer any need for an emperor in the West. The Eastern emperor accepted this. He had no choice. He could not defend the West. He could barely defend the East. And so the Western Roman Empire ended. Not with a battle or a dramatic siege, just with a tired man acknowledging reality. The city of Rome remained. The Senate still met. Latin was still spoken. Churches still stood. But there was no emperor, no legions, no laws enforced across continents. The empire in the West was over. But in the East, in Constantinople, behind walls that had never fallen, something remarkable continued. Rome endured. Chapter 7. The Long Goodbye. The Western Empire died in 476, but Rome itself did not disappear. The city remained. 1 million people had once lived there, filling the streets, the forums, the baths. Now perhaps 50,000 remained, scattered among ruins that were already ancient, living in the shadow of monuments they could no longer maintain. The aqueducts still brought water, though some had fallen into disrepair. The Colosseum still stood, though no one held games anymore. The Senate still convened, though it had no power, no army, no emperor to advise. Odoacer ruled Italy as king, not emperor. He respected Roman traditions, kept the administration functioning, protected the church. Life continued, quieter and smaller, but recognizable. Then Theodoric the Ostrogoth came. He had been raised in Constantinople, educated in Roman ways, sent by the Eastern Emperor to take Italy from Odoacer. Theodoric defeated Odoacer, invited him to a peace banquet, and personally cut him down with a sword. Theodoric ruled Italy for 33 years. He was fair, capable, and deeply respectful of Roman culture. He repaired aqueducts, maintained roads, protected scholars. He governed from Ravenna, living in a palace decorated with mosaics that showed him dressed as a Roman emperor, surrounded by Roman senators, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The Visigoths ruled Spain. The Vandals controlled North Africa and had built a fleet that terrorized the Mediterranean. The Franks were carving out a kingdom in Gaul. Britain had been abandoned completely, left to defend itself against Saxons and Angles who came across the sea. The western territories that had once been Roman were now barbarian kingdoms. They kept Roman laws, spoke Latin in their courts, and converted to Christianity. They considered themselves heirs to Rome, not destroyers of it. But they were not Roman, not anymore. In the east, however, Rome lived on. Constantinople had become everything the old capital once was. Wealthy, powerful, defended by walls so massive that no enemy had ever breached them. The emperors in Constantinople still called themselves Roman. They still claimed authority over the entire empire, east and west. They spoke Greek now, not Latin, but they traced their lineage back to Augustus, to Caesar, to Romulus himself. And in 527 after Christ, one of those emperors decided it was time to restore the glory of Rome. His name was Justinian. Justinian was born a peasant in a small village in the Balkans. His uncle, Justin, was an illiterate soldier who rose through the ranks and somehow became emperor. When Justin died in 527, Justinian inherited the throne. He was 45 years old, brilliant, ambitious, and married to one of the most extraordinary women in history, Theodora. She had been an actress, which in those days meant something close to a prostitute. She performed in scandalous plays, lived a life the aristocracy considered shameful, but she was intelligent, fearless, and utterly loyal. When Justinian fell in love with her, he changed the law so he could marry her. When he became emperor, she became empress. And when a massive riot nearly overthrew him, it was Theodora who convinced him to stay and fight. The Nika riots in 532 nearly destroyed Constantinople. Rioters burned half the city, proclaimed a new emperor, and surrounded the palace. Justinian prepared to flee. Theodora stopped him. "Royal purple makes the finest burial shroud," she said. "I would rather die an empress than live a fugitive." Justinian stayed. His general, Belisarius, trapped the rioters in the hippodrome and slaughtered 30,000 of them. The rebellion ended, and Justinian set about rebuilding. He rebuilt Constantinople into the most beautiful city in the world. The Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, rose from the ashes of the old church destroyed in the riots. It took 5 years to build, employed 10,000 workers, and when it was finished, it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The dome seemed to float, suspended on light, glowing with mosaics of gold. 40 windows encircled its base, letting in streams of sunlight that made the interior shimmer like heaven itself. When Justinian first entered the completed church, he stood in silence, overwhelmed. Then he whispered, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." It was the greatest architectural achievement since the Pantheon, and it still stands today, 1400 years later. But Justinian did not just rebuild Constantinople. He wanted to rebuild the empire. He sent Belisarius west with an army. Belisarius was a genius, one of history's greatest generals, and he reconquered North Africa from the Vandals in a single year. Then he turned to Italy. The Ostrogoths had ruled there since Theodoric, but Justinian wanted it back. The Gothic War lasted 20 years. It was brutal, devastating. Cities were besieged, burned, depopulated. Rome itself changed hands multiple times. The aqueducts were cut. The population collapsed. But Belisarius won. Italy was Roman again. Justinian sent armies to Spain, reconquering part of that too. By the end of his reign, the Mediterranean was almost a Roman lake again, just as it had been in the time of Augustus. Justinian's greatest legacy, however, was not military. It was legal. Roman law had accumulated for 1,000 years, layer upon layer, contradictory and chaotic. Justinian ordered it all compiled, organized, and clarified. The result was the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law. It included the Institutes, a textbook for law students, the Digest, a collection of legal opinions from Rome's greatest jurists, the Codex, imperial laws organized by topic, and the novels, new laws issued by Justinian himself. It was monumental. It preserved Roman legal thought, protected it from being lost, and became the foundation for legal systems across Europe for the next 1,000 years. Every law school today, every court system in the Western world, owes something to Justinian's codification. But the reconquest came at a terrible cost. The wars drained the treasury. Justinian raised taxes, squeezed the provinces, demanded more and more from a population already exhausted. Then, in 541, plague arrived. The plague of Justinian swept through the empire like wildfire. It came from Egypt, carried by rats on grain ships, and spread through every city, every village, every household. People died by the thousands, then by the tens of thousands, then more. Bodies piled in the streets. Mass graves could not be dug fast enough. The living could not bury the dead. Justinian himself caught the plague. He survived, but millions did not. Historians estimate that half the population of the empire died. Agriculture collapsed. Trade stopped. The army could not find recruits. Justinian lived to see his dream crumble. The territories he had reconquered began slipping away almost immediately. Italy was invaded again. North Africa fell into chaos. When Justinian died in 565, he left an empire that was exhausted, depopulated, and bankrupt. He had reached too far, and Rome, even in its eastern form, could not hold what he had grasped. The emperors who followed Justinian faced a world that was closing in. To the north, Slavic tribes poured across the Danube, settling in the Balkans, cutting Constantinople off from its European territories. To the east, Persia renewed its ancient rivalry, attacking again and again, pushing deep into Roman lands. The empire shrank. It adapted. It survived. The Byzantine Empire, as historians would later call it, became something different from the Rome of old. It spoke Greek. It was deeply Christian, with the emperor seen as God's representative on earth, protector of the faith. The empire reorganized itself around themes, military districts where soldiers were given land in exchange for service. It created a professional bureaucracy, efficient and complex, that could function even when emperors were weak. And it endured crisis after crisis. In 610, the Emperor Heraclius took the throne and found the empire on the brink of collapse. The Persians had conquered Syria, Egypt, and were threatening Constantinople itself. Heraclius fought back. He reformed the army, led campaigns personally, and in a series of brilliant battles, defeated the Persians and reclaimed the lost territories. He returned to Constantinople in triumph, carrying the true cross, which the Persians had stolen from Jerusalem. The people hailed him as a second Alexander, but the victory was hollow. The empire had barely recovered when a new threat emerged, one that would change the world. In 632, in the deserts of Arabia, a prophet named Muhammad united the Arab tribes under a new faith, Islam. When Muhammad died, his followers did not stop. They exploded outward, carrying their faith with fire and sword, conquering with a speed that stunned the world. They swept through Persia, shattering the empire that had fought Rome for centuries. They took Syria, the Holy Land where Christ had walked. They conquered Egypt, the breadbasket of the empire, in a matter of years. By 650, the entire southern and eastern shores of the Mediterranean were gone. Lands that had been Roman for 700 years were now part of the Caliphate. The Byzantine Empire lost two-thirds of its territory in a single generation. Constantinople should have fallen, but it didn't. The Arabs besieged Constantinople twice, once in 674, again in 717. Both times, they brought massive armies, fleets that darkened the sea, siege engines that could break any wall. And both times, Constantinople held. The walls were too strong, the defenders were too determined. And the Byzantines had a weapon the Arabs could not counter: Greek fire. A liquid mixture, the formula of which was one of history's most closely guarded secrets, that burned on water that could not be extinguished. Byzantine ships sprayed it from siphons mounted on their bows, turning enemy fleets into floating infernos. The Arabs retreated, their armies shattered, their fleets destroyed, and Constantinople survived. For the next 700 years, the Byzantine Empire continued. It grew smaller. It faced invasions, civil wars, heresies, and plagues. But it endured. It preserved ancient texts that would have been lost forever. Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, Ptolemy. When Western Europe descended into the Dark Ages, Constantinople kept the light of learning alive. It built magnificent churches. It created art that glowed with gold and mystery. It produced scholars, theologians, and historians who chronicled the long decline with clarity and grace. And it never stopped calling itself Roman. The emperors in Constantinople wore purple. They ruled from a senate. They issued laws in the name of Rome. They believed, until the very end, that they were the continuation of the eternal city, the unbroken line stretching back 2,000 years. But the world was changing, and no belief, no matter how strong, could stop what was coming. By the 11th century after Christ, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former self. It had lost Asia Minor to the Seljuk Turks. It had lost its Italian territories to the Normans. It watched as Western Europe, once poor and backwards, grew wealthy and powerful, building cathedrals and universities, launching crusades. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade, an army of Western Christians supposedly on their way to liberate Jerusalem, turned against Constantinople instead. They attacked the city they had sworn to protect. They breached the walls. They looted churches, smashed icons, stole relics, and burned libraries. For 3 days, the capital of Eastern Christianity was pillaged by its own supposed allies. It was a betrayal so profound that the Eastern Orthodox Church never forgave the West. The Byzantines eventually reclaimed the city in 1261, but it was a broken, hollow version of what it had been. The wealth was gone. The population had collapsed. The empire was reduced to the city itself and a few scattered territories. And to the east, a new power was rising. The Ottoman Turks began as a small tribe on the edge of Anatolia, but they were organized, disciplined, and relentless. They conquered piece by piece, city by city, until only Constantinople remained. By 1453, the city was an island in an Ottoman sea. The emperor, Constantine XI, ruled over perhaps 50,000 people. The once great walls were crumbling. There was no money to repair them. No allies would come to help. Sultan Mehmed II assembled an army of 80,000 men and surrounded the city. He brought cannons, massive bronze guns that could hurl stone balls weighing over 1,000 pounds. They pounded the walls day after day, cracking the stone, opening breaches. For 53 days, the defenders held. Citizens, monks, soldiers, foreign volunteers, all fought side by side. They repaired the walls at night. They launched desperate sorties. They prayed in the Hagia Sophia, begging for a miracle. No miracle came. On the morning of May 29th, 1453, the Ottomans launched their final assault. They attacked in waves, relentless, climbing over their own dead to reach the walls. Constantine XI, last emperor of Rome, tore off his imperial insignia and threw himself into the thickest part of the fighting. He refused to abandon his city. He would die as an emperor, not a fugitive. He was never seen again. His body was never found. Some say he died fighting at the walls. Some say he was buried in the rubble, unrecognized, unmarked. The walls fell. The gates broke. Ottoman soldiers poured into the streets. The Hagia Sophia, where thousands had taken refuge, was emptied. The great church, which had stood for 900 years, was stripped of its treasures. Then Sultan Mehmed entered. He stood beneath the floating dome, looked up at the mosaics glowing in the light, and ordered it converted into a mosque. Constantinople became Istanbul. The Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of Rome, breathed its last. It had lasted 1,480 years, longer than any empire in history. Epilogue, the immortal idea, and yet, Rome did not die. It lived on in the laws that govern nations today, in the languages spoken across 3 continents, in the architecture that still shapes our cities. It lived in the title Caesar, which became Kaiser in German, Tsar in Russian, words that meant emperor for 1,000 years after the last Roman fell. It lived in the Holy Roman Empire, which claimed to be Rome's heir for centuries, even though Voltaire famously joked it was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. It lived in the Renaissance, when scholars rediscovered Roman texts and sparked a rebirth of learning. In the Enlightenment, when philosophers looked to the Roman Republic as a model of balanced government. In every revolution that claimed to restore ancient virtues and republican ideals, the founders of the United States studied Rome obsessively. They created a Senate, a Capitol, a republic. They debated whether democracy could survive the size of empire, the same question Romans had asked 2,000 years before. Rome lives in every courthouse with columns, every government building with domes, every city planned with forums and public squares. It lives in words: republic, Senate, citizen, justice, empire. Words that came from Latin, that carried Roman ideas into the modern world. And it lives in memory. In the ruins of the Colosseum, the arches of aqueducts, the roads still travelled, the walls still standing. Rome fell. But Rome endures. From a village beside the Tiber to the golden walls of Constantinople, from Romulus and the she-wolf to Constantine, the 11th dying with sword in hand, 2,000 years of conquest, glory, hubris, and survival. It was an empire built on violence, held together by law, transformed by faith, and remembered forever. The empire ended, but the story never will. And so we've reached the end of this long journey through time. From the cry of abandoned twins beside a muddy river to the silence of falling walls. From the moment Romulus drew his first border in blood to the day Constantine fell, defending the last border that remained. Rome rose, conquered, endured, and finally, after more centuries than most empires even dream of, it fell. But as we've seen, falling is not the same as dying. Rome shaped the world we live in today. It gave us laws, languages, ideas that still echo through courtrooms and capitals and classrooms. Every time we speak of justice, citizenship, or republic, we're speaking Latin. Every time we build with arches, govern with constitutions, or dream of empire, we're walking in Roman footsteps. If this journey resonated with you, if you found yourself lost in the past tonight, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button. Leave a comment. Tell me where you listened from. What part of Rome's story moved you most? And if you'd like more nights like this, more stories drawn from the depths of history, subscribe. There are so many more worlds to explore together. For now, though, rest. Let the weight of 2,000 years settle into memory. Let the voices of emperors and slaves, philosophers and soldiers fade into the quiet. Sleep well, and may you dream of empires. Good night.